Okay, so let's unpack this. We've covered a lot of ground on this show before. I mean, everything from astrophysics to ancient history. But today's source material is, well, it's slippery.
Slippery is definitely the perfect word for it. It really defies the usual categorization.
Right, because usually I can tell you, the listener, exactly what we're looking at. I can say, here's a white paper, or here's a really dry historical commentary. But this, it presents itself as a narrative, but it's not really fiction, or at least it doesn't claim to be.
No, it doesn't.
It's written in the first person, but the I speaking isn't a human author.
And that's the hook that just grabs you immediately. You're reading a retelling of a very famous, very dusty Bronze Age event, the Israelites crossing the Jordan River. But it's told through the internal monologue of the pre-existent, eternal Jesus Christ.
Which is, quite frankly, a really bold move for any writer. It catches you totally off guard. I mean, the very first line of the text is, I remember the weight of that moment more than the weight of the water.
Yeah, and just like that, the whole perspective shifts. You aren't looking at the event from the outside like a historian with a clipboard. You are looking through the eyes of the architect.
And that really is the mission of this deep dive today. We aren't here to just retell a Sunday school story about people getting their feet wet in a river. We need to unpack how this specific source challenges you to see the Bible not as some collection of random ancient stories, but as a supernaturally authored masterpiece.
Exactly. The text makes this incredibly compelling argument that there is a master author at work, someone who is coordinating geology, history, and theology across literally thousands of years.
Right. It's the idea that the physical geography, like the actual dirt, the riverbeds, the rock, it isn't just setting the scene. It's actually a blueprint.
It's a map, a spiritual map.
And the craziest part of all of this, the linchpin of this whole grand argument, the thing that connects a Bronze Age river crossing to the literal end of the world in Revelation, is a pile of rocks.
Well, actually, two piles of rocks.
Two piles of rocks, yes.
Two monuments, one that everyone sees and one that absolutely nobody sees.
So let's dive right in. Let's set the scene for you if you might be a bit rusty on your book of Joshua. What is actually happening in this narrative?
Well, the stakes are incredibly high here. You have the Israelites, who are basically a nation of escaped slaves, and they have been wandering in the desert for 40 years.
A long time.
A very long time. Moses, their legendary leader, has just died. Joshua is the new guy in charge. They are finally standing on the very edge of the Promised Land, but there is a massive obstacle in the way. The Jordan River.
And the source points out that this wasn't just a nice little trickling stream.
Oh, no. It was flood season. This was a raging, chaotic barrier. Logistically speaking, crossing it with women, children, and livestock was completely impossible. But the text describes this incredible moment when the priests, who are carrying the Ark of the Covenant, step into the water.
The Ark being that gold-plated box that represents God's literal presence on earth.
Exactly. And the source gives us this beautiful, almost haunting insight from the divine perspective. The text reads, "The river did not resist me when it stopped. Creation never does."
Wow.
Yeah, it paints this picture where nature is just perfectly obedient. The water it obeys, it piles up in a heap miles away. It's the human beings who are trembling, not the water.
So the water stops. The priests walk right into the middle of the muddy riverbed, and they just stand there on dry ground while the entire nation crosses over. That's the big miracle. That's the part everyone who grew up in Sunday school knows.
Right. The parting of the waters. But the source material zooms in on what happens while they are crossing. Joshua calls 12 men, one from each of the 12 tribes, and he gives them a very specific, kind of weird task.
He tells them to go into the riverbed, right where the priests are standing.
What the text calls the sacred locus, the exact GPS coordinate where the presence of God is actively holding back the chaos of the flood.
And he has them grab 12 stones.
Big ones. They hoist them onto their shoulders, carry them out to the riverbank, and eventually they build a monument at a place called Gilgal. And the source is very clear about the purpose of these stones. It says they are for visible testimony.
So children would one day point at them and ask what they meant. It's basically a museum exhibit. It's there to declare to the world, we were here, God did this.
Right. It's public, it's undeniable, but, and here's where the source threw me a curveball that I genuinely did not see coming.
The twist.
The twist. Most people just stop reading the biblical text there, but the source highlights a detail in the original historical account that almost everyone completely glosses over.
The second set of stones.
Yes. While the first set of stones is being carried out to the dry land, Joshua does something else. He goes back to that exact same spot in the mud, that imprint of holy ground, and he gathers another 12 stones.
But he doesn't give them to anyone to carry.
No, he doesn't carry them out at all.
He arranges them right there in the middle of the riverbed.
Down in the hole, in the mud. And then the priests walk out, that invisible dam breaks, the waters of the Jordan come crashing back down, and that second monument is instantly and violently submerged.
Okay, I have to pause here. Because when I first read this part, my immediate thought was just, why?
It makes no sense.
Right, exactly. Why build a monument that literally nobody will ever see? It seems so counterintuitive. If you want to be remembered, you put a bronze statue in the town square. You don't bury a time capsule that no one is ever allowed to dig up.
It definitely seems irrational. If you look at it purely through human logic, it's a complete waste of time and heavy lifting. But the source argues that this wasn't Joshua just being eccentric or dramatic. This was prophetic architecture.
Prophetic architecture. I really like that phrase.
It's a great concept. The text uses a phrase that really anchors this entire deep dive. It says, same origin, different destiny.
Right?
Both piles of rocks came from the exact same holy spot in the river, but one goes up into the sunlight to be seen by the whole world. The other goes down into the darkness to be hidden by the water.
So surely this represents something deeper, right?
It represents the entire history of God's relationship with humanity. The source draws this brilliant line between these rocks and two major biblical covenants. Think about the visible stones at Gilgal. They are hard, they are cold, they are external. The source compares them to the law given at Mount Sinai.
The Ten Commandments.
Yeah.
The stone tablets.
Exactly. The text says, covenant established in stone. Necessary, but external. It instructs you from the outside, do this, don't do that. It's a witness to you, but it doesn't fundamentally change who you are. It's just a monument you visit.
But the hidden stones.
The hidden stones represent something else entirely. The source links them to the prophet Jeremiah. Centuries later, Jeremiah prophesies about a coming day when the covenant wouldn't be written on cold stone tablets, but written on the human heart.
So the hidden nature of the stones represents interiority, the internal life.
Precisely. The hidden stones are, as the text puts it, surrendered to concealment. They are effectively baptized into the earth. The text actually says the old covenant needed visibility. The new would require transformation. They represent a reality that is deep, submerged, and internal.
Okay, so if I'm tracking with you here, you have one set of stones shouting to the world, hey, look what happened here. And you have another set of stones silently sitting in the deep, just holding the space where the presence of God rested.
And for centuries, that's exactly where the story sat. Two piles of rocks, one famous, one totally forgotten, one becoming a tourist attraction, the other covered in algae and mud.
Until we get to the New Testament. And this is really where the master author argument in the source starts to flex its muscles.
This is the convergence point. This is where it gets mind-blowing.
The source takes us to the baptism of Jesus. Now, usually when we visualize this, we just picture Jesus going down to a generic river, getting dunked by John, and leaving. But the source points out the physical geography. Where exactly does this baptism happen?
The Gospel of John specifies a place called Bethany beyond the Jordan. And historically, archaeologically, this is widely believed to be the exact area of the ancient crossing.
Wow.
And the source paints this incredible visual from Jesus's perspective. He's standing there on the bank. Everyone else around him, John the Baptist, the crowds, the Pharisees, they just see a muddy river.
But the eye of the narrative sees with, like spiritual X-ray vision.
He knows what's underneath the water. He says, when I stepped into the water, I stood above the place from which both sets of stones had come.
That gave me actual chills reading it. The idea that thousands of years prior, Joshua puts these rocks there, essentially leaving a GPS marker for the Messiah. Like, stand here.
And look at the deep symbolism the source unpacks here. The ground beneath them had once held the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark held back the waters of judgment, right? It kept the people safe from the flood. But now, Jesus enters the water. And the source argues that he is the true Ark.
But the river doesn't stop this time. The water doesn't pile up.
No, it doesn't. And that's a really critical distinction. The text says, I entered the waters while heaven opened. It calls this the pattern advancing, not repeating. In Joshua's day, the stones were separated. Some went up into the light, some went down into the dark. But the source argues that Jesus came to finally unite those two destinies.
There's a specific line in the text that sums this up perfectly. It says, I would take men from ordinary life and unite both destinies in them.
And that brings us directly to the concept of the living stone.
Which refers to the disciples.
Right.
Now, a skeptic might listen to this and say, okay, the number 12 is super common in the Bible, 12 tribes, 12 months. It's just a cultural number.
Right.
But the source is pretty adamant that this is a direct engineered callback. Joshua chooses 12 men to handle the rocks. Jesus chooses 12 men, fishermen, a tax collector, a zealot, to actually be the rocks.
It argues complete intentionality. The text says, just as 12 stones were lifted from the ark's resting place, 12 men would be drawn around me. It's implying that the disciples, and by extension, all believers, are literally drawn from the river of humanity.
But here's the really cool part, and I want to make sure I understand this correctly. The source claims that in a believer, the burial and the elevation happened at the exact same time.
Yes. This is the core theological argument of the whole piece. Think about the life of a disciple. The text says, they would be buried with me. They would be raised with me.
Which is basically the textbook definition of baptism.
Exactly. You die to yourself. That's the riverbed stones. That's the hidden life, the submerged reality that nobody sees. But you are also raised to a new life. That's the Gilgal stones, the visible testimony to the world. We aren't just one or the other anymore. We are the integration of both.
As the text says, no longer two monuments, but a single living testimony.
And the source actually brings the Apostle Peter into this to prove the point, which is honestly kind of funny, right? Because Jesus gives Simon a very specific nickname. He calls him Peter.
Which literally translates to rock.
It's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
The source reminds us that Peter later writes a letter, 1 Peter, where he explicitly calls believers living stones.
See, I always thought that was just a nice poetic metaphor, like, oh, we're strong and sturdy like stones, just good ancient poetry.
A lot of people think that. But the source suggests Peter wasn't being poetic at all. He was being geographical. He was remembering exactly where he came from. He understood that he was pulled from the chaotic waters by Christ, just like those ancient stones were pulled from the Jordan by Joshua.
He had walked the geography of it. I really love that concept, that their theology wasn't just some abstract idea in their heads, it was literally under their feet.
And that's the true power of this master author perspective. If you just read the Bible as a disjointed library of disconnected books written by dozens of guys over 1,000 years, you miss this completely. You miss that Joshua, Jeremiah, the Gospels, and Peter are all pulling on the exact same thread.
But the thread doesn't even end there.
No, it goes further.
And this is where the source gets really ambitious. It takes us all the way to the end of the book, the final architecture. The book of Revelation.
This is absolutely the mic drop moment for the text.
Now, Revelation is... well, it's complicated. It's full of dragons and bulls of wrath and trumpets. It is very easy to get completely lost in the weeds there. But the source zeroes in on one specific thing, the construction of the New Jerusalem.
Specifically the numbers and the structure of it. John of Patmos describes seeing this massive city descending from heaven, and he specifically describes it having 12 gates and 12 foundations.
Okay, stop right there. 12 and 12 again.
But look at the names inscribed on them. The gates bear the names of the 12 tribes of Israel.
The Old Testament people. The nation.
The visible witness. The Gilgal stones.
And the foundations.
The foundations bear the names of the 12 apostles.
The New Testament witness.
Yeah.
The riverbed stones.
Yes. And in this final city, they are fused into one single structure. The text describes it as one city, radiant, integrated. The source argues that this is the final, ultimate resolution of the pattern that started in the mud of the Jordan. In the end, there aren't two monuments anymore. You don't have the visible versus the hidden. Everything is brought into the light. The foundation supports the gates. The gates open to the foundation.
The text says, everything that came from that one sacred locus in the Jordan finds its completion there.
And this is where the argument just becomes undeniable for the source. It asks you to seriously consider, could Joshua have possibly known about the blueprint of the New Jerusalem?
There's no way. He was a Bronze Age military commander.
Could Peter have engineered the exact number of tribes centuries before he was even born?
Completely impossible.
But the eye of the story of the pre-existent Jesus says Joshua could not see that far, but I did.
That is the chilling part. When Joshua was standing in the mud, stacking up 12 wet rocks that he knew nobody would ever see again, he probably thought he was just marking a spot. Or maybe he just thought he was being obedient to a really weird command. But the source says he was touching a pattern that began before the river and would outlast the sea.
It completely changes how you look at the text. It suggests that nothing is wasted. That's a massive theme in this deep dive. The narrative states nothing taken from where I stand is ever lost.
Whether it's raised up in the sunlight or hidden beneath the dark waters.
Exactly. And I think that is the practical takeaway for you, the listener here. We as humans naturally tend to value the sunlight things, the visible success, the public platform, the Gilboa stones. We want our lives to be the monument that people see and applaud.
Especially now in our culture. If it's not documented on social media, did it even happen?
Right.
We are so obsessed with the visible monument.
Right. We want the credit. But this story is deeply vindicating the hidden things, the prayers that nobody ever hears, the quiet obedience that nobody sees, the riverbed moments. The source is telling you that those hidden stones are just as secure in the mind of the architect as the visible ones.
They are arguably the actual foundation. I mean, you can't have the glowing gates without the heavy foundation. You can't have the glory of the resurrection without the quiet of the burial.
And pointing back to the eye of the story, the pre-existent Christ remembers the hidden stones. He says, I have never forgotten what is hidden.
That is powerful. It really shifts the burden off of us. It's no longer, I need to prove my worth to the world. It's, I am known by the architect.
And I am part of a grand design. That's the other beautiful thing. It removes the randomness from our lives. Just as the disciples were chosen intentionally, not arbitrarily, the source implies that our specific placement in this architecture is totally intentional.
We are living stones.
We are living stones being built into a spiritual house. That's the exact language Peter used, and this deep dive really shows exactly where that language originated. It came straight out of the mud of the Jordan River.
It's amazing to think that a seemingly simple historical account about crossing a river could hold that much theological weight.
Well, like the source said, the earth beneath their feet had never borne that weight before. It was the weight of a promise that spanned eternity.
So we've gone from the muddy riverbed of the Jordan, through the baptism of Jesus, all the way to the radiant, integrated city of Revelation. And it all stems from one single place.
The place where heaven touched earth.
It really does challenge you to view the scriptures differently. Not as some human invention or an anthology of myths, but as a supernatural design where thousands of years of human history all align into a single cohesive narrative.
Absolutely. It turns the Bible from a dusty library into a single book. A single story with a single hero.
And a single architect. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you, our listener, with something to really think about. We've talked a lot today about the visible versus the hidden. We all have Gilgal stones in our lives.
Yeah.
You know, things we're proud of, things people see, career wins, public achievements, degrees on the wall.
But the question this source provokes is so much deeper than that.
Right. If the physical geography of the Jordan River was actually a map for a spiritual reality, what are the submerged stones in your own life? What are those hidden acts of obedience or those unseen moments of quiet faith that you feel like nobody ever noticed? Maybe you did the right thing and it really cost you and no one ever clapped.
And the question is, can you trust that they aren't lost? That those unseen moments are actually part of a much larger eternal architecture that is still being built today?
Maybe those buried moments aren't wasted at all. Maybe they are actually the very foundation of something radiant that you just can't see quite yet. It's definitely something to mull over. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
Always a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.